When we ran the application, we saw that before printing this line, that is at line number 20, at line number 18 itself, these three lines were printed, which means that the function dummy DAO as well as JDBC DAO have already been called. When we say in line number 22, give me a bean object over here, Spring is not going to call the dummy DAO or JDBC DAO again, but instead it's simply going to return the object from here. So as you can see at this time, DAO already corresponds to JDBC DAO, and we are simply getting the reference of this. Just to prove the point, if I go here and then call this one more time, let's say this time I'll say DAO2 equals to ctx.getBean, and we'll call JDBC DAO itself here, and we want an instance of product DAO.class. One of the error that you will see is that DAO2 has not been created. In Java, every variable must be declared, so we can press Command 1 on Mac, Control 1 on other computers to get an IntelliSense to create a local variable. This is called quick fix. To get a quick fix, press Control 1 or Command 1 depending on your computer, press Enter. You'll see that automatically it says product DAO variable because the return value of this happens to be a product DAO. Anyways, if you happen to look at this, now what has happened is that we got a DAO2 here, which is also referencing to the same object. So there are two references, single object. So if I type here DAO2 is equals to DAO is, and then you can check DAO2 double equals to DAO. This should give me true because both of them are pointing to the same location. So just to check this out, let's run the program. And you will see that it says DAO2 equals to DAO is true. But sometimes you may want to have it otherwise. For example, every time you say give me a bean, you want a new bean object. This is only possible if you mark the bean JDBC DAO or whichever the bean you are looking for as a prototype. Now the way you do is you go to app config 1 and let's say this is the one that we are looking at. We can annotate this as at scope, and the scope has two options here at this time. We can say Singleton, which is the default value for scope at this time, and the other option is prototype. Now since we are working on a annotation config application context, these are the only two scopes that are there. But when you're working with Spring Web applications, then you will also have scopes like request, session, and global session. So now the scope is prototype. There'll be a significant change in its behavior. Let's save this, go back to our program, run the same. Now keep an eye on this line. You will see that the JDBC DAO is not printed before this particular line. And that's because when the Spring container was manufactured, there is only dummy DAO that got created. And because JDBC DAO is a prototype, it is not even inside this particular container. So DAO refers to one single object and DAO2 corresponds to another object. So these two don't exist and this object also doesn't exist anymore. So Spring will not be maintaining the life cycle of prototype beans. Meaning of that is if you say DAO equals to null, then this object is ready for garbage collection. DAO2 equals to null or DAO2 equals to something else, this object will also be ready for garbage collection. Whereas in the previous case, when it's a singleton, if DAO equals to null, Spring would still maintain a copy of the bean object itself. You can also see here DAO2 equals to DAO is also false because it corresponds to two different objects right now. When a bean is singleton, let's go back to our code here and change this to singleton, which is by default. You can also say that the bean has to be instantiated only on first request. For example, at this time, if you go here and run the application, you will see that irrespective of whether you asked or not, dummy DAO was called, JDBC DAO also was called, but we never made use of this dummy DAO at all. In order to tell the Spring container that, hey, create the bean only if it is needed, but still it is a singleton, you can mark a singleton bean as at lazy, which makes the bean qualified for lazy instantiation. So let's save this and then go back over here and then run this. You will see that before the line there is no dummy DAO, but before the line there is a JDBC DAO because this is an eager instantiation. But if I go to the app config 1, copy and paste the same thing for the second bean also, you will see that before this particular line, that is when the string container is created, no beans are created even though they are singleton. But on the first request here, JDBC DAO function gets called, which means that we get a reference of the singleton bean here. But when I call this second time, the bean already exists. This being a singleton, the same reference is given to this again. But all those things happen at later point in time when you actually ask for a bean. So let's run the same thing again and check it out. And you will see that the JDBC DAO is called only once. DAO2 is same as DAO because there are two references, single object.